أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي واجعل لي وزيرا من أهلي هارون أخي اشدد به أزري وأشركه في أمري كي نسبحك كثيرا ونذكرك كثيرا إنك كنت بنا بصيرا صلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we will continue our discussion on the words third light. This is 25th word, third light, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The third light consists of three gleams. First gleam. An important aspect of the Quran of miraculous expositions, miraculousness, was explained in the 13th word. It has been included here so that it might take its place among the other aspects of miraculousness, its brothers. It's as follows. If you want to see and appreciate how, like shining stars, all the Quran's verses scatter the darkness of unbelief by spreading the light of miraculousness and guidance, imagine yourself in the age of ignorance and desert of savagery, where everything was enveloped in lifeless veils of nature, under the darkness of ignorance and heedlessness. Again, while I'm reading, author in between his words, actually, he is putting some further interpretations of verses. So, for example, like by introducing some words, he said, if you want to see and appreciate how, like shining stars, all the Quran's verses scatter the darkness of unbelief by spreading the light of miraculousness and guidance, as if now it is talking about, it reminds me of how Quran is talking about shooting stars, for example. And in a sense, interpreting the verses about shooting stars with every verse of the Quran being those shooting stars, and how they are scattering the darkness of unbelief by spreading the light of miraculousness and guidance. So I close the parentheses here and continue. So he says, in order to do that, imagine yourself in the age of ignorance and desert of savagery, where everything was enveloped in lifeless veils of nature, under the darkness of ignorance and heedlessness. Then suddenly from the elevated tongue of the Quran, you hear verses like, whatever is in the heavens extols and glorifies God, for he is the mighty, the wise. This is the verse, or the verses like, سبح لله ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم, which repeats in multiple places in Quran, like in chapter 57, first verse, 59, first verse, 69, first verse. So it's a repeating pattern or a theme in Quran. And the other verse is يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. Whatever is in the heavens and in the earth extols and glorifies God, the sovereign, the most holy one, the mighty, the wise. So the author says, see how those dead or sleeping creatures of the world spring to life at the sound of sabbaha, extols, and yusabbihu, glorifies, in the minds of those listening, how they awake, those creatures, they wake up, they awake, spring up, and mention God's names. And at the sound of تسبح له السماوات السبع والأرض, the seven heavens and the earth, and all within them extol and glorify him. Okay. The stars in those black skies, each a lifeless piece of fire, and the wretched creatures on the face of the earth, present the following view to those listening. The sky appears as a mouth, and the stars as wisdom displaying words and truth uttering lights. The earth appears as a head, the land and sea as tongues, and all animals and plants as words of glorification. So I'm going back to the verse again. The verse was saying, تُسَبِّحُ لَهُ السَّمَاوَاتُ السَّبْعُ وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَنْ فِيهِنْ. So it's about glorification, but what is it that glorifies? The seven heavens and the earth and all within them extol and glorify him. The author says this is depicting a picture. So the stars in those black skies, each a lifeless piece of fire, according to our non-Quranic perspective, this is how they would look like. And the wretched creatures on the face of the earth, they are just dying creatures, becoming dust and nothing. So with Quran's perspective, though, they present the following view to those listening. The sky appears as a mouth, and the stars as wisdom displaying words, and truth uttering lights. The earth appears as a head, the land and sea as tongues, and all animals and plants as words of glorification. Otherwise, you will not appreciate the subtleties of the pleasure at looking from this time to that verse. So because the author invited us to imagine ourselves at the time before the Quran came, where the default way of seeing the universe was just stars are just in the black sky, they are lifeless pieces of fire, and the creatures on earth are wretched creatures, and life was pointless. It was simply survival of the fittest, pretty much as it is nowadays. But he's saying that maybe that we are born and raised in an environment in which Quranic perspective became part of worldview, then maybe we may not be able to appreciate how unique, how beautiful those are since we get used to it. So the author is inviting us to go back to the time before Quran, imagine ourselves there, and how universe will look like, and with the message of Quran, how it's totally changing its shape and meaning. So it says, otherwise, if you don't do that, otherwise you will not appreciate the subtleties of the pleasure at looking from this time to that verse. For if you look at each verse as having scattered its light since that time, and having become like universally accepted knowledge with the passage of time, and as shining with the other lights of Islam, and taking its color from the sun of the Quran, or if you look at it through a superficial and simple veil of familiarity, you will not truly see what sort of darkness each verse scatters, or how sweet is the recital of its miraculousness, and you will not appreciate this sort of its miraculousness among its many sorts. So it makes sense. He is especially mentioning two things. The first one is either such truth became universally accepted knowledge within especially Islamic community, or alternatively, I look at them very superficially. Like the verse says something, I don't think too much about it. Superficially, I just say, oh yeah, this is talking about sama. I don't know what sama is, or I don't know what it means to me. Simply, I go with maybe a few dictionary definition at most. So superficially looking at it, then I will not be able to appreciate the beauty or the light that this verse is demonstrating. If you want to see one of the highest degrees of the Quran of miraculous expositions, miraculousness, listen to the following comparison. So I can pause here if anybody has any comment. The topic is still going to be about, it's a continuation, but it's going to be a little bit of a long read. If there is any immediate comment, I would like to hear. I'm waiting a few seconds, or any question or comment. Okay. Again, so far the point that the author making was, there might come a question to our mind saying that, well, there is beauty in this sentence, like if it is the speech of the creator. Like, I mean, personally, I've never read, Shakespeare, but the ones who like Shakespeare, when they read him, they say, wow, this is extraordinary. This is a masterpiece of speech, for instance. When I read Quran, am I feeling like that? Am I feeling like, oh, this is so unique. This is unlike human speech. And if I don't say so, what might be the reason? The author says, as if in here, either because it became like common knowledge to everyone. So since the Quran has been spreading this light for centuries, then in order to experience its true taste, you need to also experience the darkness. So he says, simulate that darkness for yourself. This was the first part. And the second part says, well, maybe you're looking too superficial. So either look in depth or imagine yourself before the message of the Quran and how the universe would look like, and then evaluate the message of Quran and how it is changing the shape of the world. So this is in summary what I understood from the part. Any comments, questions? If not, I'll continue. Okay. If you want to see one of the highest degrees of the Quran of miraculous expositions, miraculousness, listen to the following comparison. Let us imagine an extremely strange and vast and spreading tree, which is concealed beneath a veil of the unseen and hidden in a level of concealment. We are imagining a huge tree, and a strange tree, not something that we know of before, but it is as if hidden and concealed under a veil, so we don't see the tree. It is clear that there has to be a relationship, harmony, and balance between a tree and all its members, like its branches, fruits, leaves, and blossom, the same as between men's members. Like from the construction of the example, the author is saying that since it's a tree, there must be a proportion, the relationship, harmony, balance between the components of that tree. Right, agreed. Like the trunk should be larger than the tips of the branches, for example. Each of its parts takes on a form and is given a shape in accordance with the nature of the tree. So if someone appears and traces a picture on top of the veil corresponding to the members of the tree, which has never been seen, then delimits each member, and from the branches to the fruit, and to the fruit to the leaves, draws a form proportionately, and fills the space between its source and extremities, which are an infinite distance from one another, with drawings showing exactly the shape and form of its members. Certainly no doubt will remain that the artist sees the concealed tree with an eye that penetrates and encompasses the unseen, then he depicts it. Okay, is the example clear? Is there any parts that is not clear with the example? Let me see if there's any hands. Any requests for repetition?
I have a request for just paraphrasing it. I wasn't sure. I don't understand exactly.
Okay, so let's imagine there's a huge tree, but we don't see the tree. There is a huge veil in front of it also. But since it's a tree, it has to be proportionate. Like author is making use of the example of a tree because something is special about tree. Every part of the tree is related to each other. It is within a perfect order and harmony. Like when you are looking at the roots, like even using today's scientific knowledge, you would say that this DNA at the root is related to, and the same with the DNA in the leaf, but what you observe in the root is different than the leaf, but related. So still it is behind the veil. So it says if someone comes and starts drawing over that veil, what is behind the veil? So we still don't see the tree, but we see that this person is drawing the tree, but he is preserving the order. Like the tree is huge and strange. We haven't seen it before, but this person is drawing that tree over this huge veil, and we see that everything is fitting into place. It's not that he made a small trunk but a large fruit, or like disproportionate leaves and branches and whatever. No, everything fits in place. Actually, this uh, reminds me of this famous what is it example that I guess several people have given the same example throughout history. Uh, like in Islamic tradition, it is uh, divers diving under the sea, and they are, while their eyes are closed, they are looking for different jewels. And when they come up, they describe the jewel as if one of them has found some gold. It describes it as if the entire, let's say, the rest of the jewels were not important, but the most important part was the gold. If somebody else has found an emerald, that person would come up and say, "Oh, there were other stuff," because they are, since their eyes are closed, with their hands they are only looking for what it might be, and they only exaggerate the part about the emerald. So but the prophetic perspective, though, is in that example, opening the eyes and seeing the whole like what's it treasure, and then describing everything within proportion. This is how the example is given in Islamic tradition. In philosophy, the example is being given as there's an elephant, and different people, the eye is tied, and they are trying to, some of them holds the leg and says, "Oh, it's like a tree." The other one holds the trunk and whatever. So you know the example. So in here, in a similar way, the author is talking about a tree being described, but since it's large, if someone is able to truly uh, describe every aspect of the tree without contradicting, once you see the picture after it's being drawn, you see that, oh, the person who drew this picture must know the tree, because in its entirety. Otherwise, there would have been disproportionateness in the picture that is being drawn. So this was not a paraphrasing, I guess. I just tripled the size of the paragraph, so sorry about that.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Yusuf, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Haidar.
I'm about to board, so I'm wondering if I can ask a question before I have to get off the call. In the third to last line, well, fourth to last line, where it says, fills the space between its source and extremities, which are an infinite distance from one another. So the concept of infinity and infinite as it relates to the source is its own discussion, but how we relate it to a finite matter, the creation, I'm having a hard time wrapping around what the author is trying to convey here. Do you have thoughts about what's being conveyed about this distance, this infinite distance between the creation and the created and the creator, I mean?
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Good question. Let's ask it to everyone. So now that we understood what the example looks like, what do you think this filling the space between its source and the extremities, which are an infinite distance from one another, mean for that example, as we are talking about the creation and the creator? Okay, since no answer, so we can read the following part to see what the author means by that. But what comes to my mind quickly is, so while explaining the purpose of this existence, what it means, why it is there, because for example, in the definition of today's world, human is just like a speaking animal, which is not fitting to the purpose of the creation. Like you are making in the whole creation such an important, if you like, jewel or the fruit of this existence, human, now becomes just another animal that is speaking. That's all about that. So it doesn't fit in that picture because such a valued thing must not be that much valueless. But then once we talk about them, what is its purpose? What's its meaning? This meaning and purpose aspect needs to be connected to the eternal aspect, like the creator, its source. So its true owner can then tell me what is my purpose of my existence. So I think this infinite distance from where I am as like a dying creature on earth to being Khalifa, because the concept of Khalifa for human is infinitely distant from being a speaking animal, because being a Khalifa means you, now divine names are in the picture. It's infinitely distant from being a dying human being, if that makes sense. Because in the second meaning, when we say Khalifa, human becomes a manifestation of God's names. Then comes that eternal aspect for human. I mean, otherwise, human by itself is just a creation and a limited being if we are talking about my size and my weight. But if we are talking about my meaning, my potential meaning as human, since it is divine names, then it becomes infinite. And the true meaning or the true shape of that tree of creation can only be explained proportionately if the divine names are introduced to the picture. Otherwise, the best we can do is what the science is doing, and it's not going to be a full picture. Okay, Brother Wickham.
I joined late, so I apologize. But for this specific question, I was, as usual, looking at the Turkish version as well. And there I realized like this infinite is not there. Nihayet is used, like very much maybe. I don't know. How would you translate it? And instead of source and extremities, words are used are like the beginning and end. But I guess you can take these two words, beginning and end, mebde and munteha. I assume they are also like Arabic in origin, so the people may know. They can also be used as the beginning and end can be used as you described, kind of the first form and the last form. But anyway, I guess the way I understand. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't want to.
Oh, I cannot hear. I don't know if it's me or.
No, I neither. So maybe there's.
No, I was just going to ask you. I was going to ask you if you know what the Arabic word. You said nahaya for the Turkish word. Do you know what the Arabic word is? Because sometimes the author will use 3 languages.
Oh, so I can check. I mean, I'm sure nihaya coming from the Arabic.
No problem. I can try to look into it later. But please finish your thought. Don't let me interrupt your thought.
My guess it's like without limit or without end. Like it's too big, the distance between the two. So anyway, like what I'm trying to say, I guess the author here is not trying to define mathematical concept. He's not saying, the beginning of the tree and the end of the tree are infinitely far away from each other. It's more like, I guess, there's a huge distance between the two, that you can take it as beginning of your life. You're coming to this world, and the point that you reach as a human being, and the distance between the two. So your beginning and your end. So I was looking at the same words, this mabda and muntaha, how it is used by the author in different places. So he used the very same structure between these two. He's referring to the birth of the prophet and his miraj. What is the English word for
Ascension.
ascension? Yes. So his birth being his beginning, and the ascension being his, let's say, end, muntaha. So the author is saying that between the two, there's a huge distance. And I guess if you take it as a tree of the creation or tree of your life, where it begins and where it ends, there's a huge distance between the two, which is filled by a lot of things. All these things between the two, in the middle, it says, right? And whoever is describing this tree or your life or the entire universe, he's describing it so precisely, despite all the things to feel between the beginning and the end. I guess that's the emphasis. The emphasis is not, the word infinite, which is, a mathematical concept. It's not the emphasis, I believe. I might be wrong.
Yes, I agree. So the main point is, so if I'm going to start, I'm going to start drawing a, I don't know, picture of a human. If I start from drawing one hand and then keep drawing to the head, let's say, then maybe as I come to the head, I'm going to draw a bigger head. But I should be keeping into account that, well, this head and this hand belongs to the same person, so they should be proportionate. So this sort of a distance. Sorry about that.
While waiting for Yusuf, maybe I can say a few things. So what I understood from this paragraph is that, like, imagine this very complicated thing, a complicated structure like your life or the entire universe, again, the tree of creation. And when you try to understand it, you realize that it is veiled. It's concealed with a veil. So you cannot penetrate and you cannot see behind it. You cannot get the meaning, what it means or what it looks like. You cannot get it. And somebody comes and give you a perfect description which fits every experience you have. So there's a veil because, you only understand part of the things. Like when it comes to your life or anything in the creation, you can touch it, you can sense it to some extent, but you cannot make them all together. You cannot see the bigger picture most of the times. And this person coming and drawing you a very accurate picture, which perfectly fits your experiences, this individual, the parts that is drawn, it perfectly fits, and the relationship between them also perfectly fits your experiences. And what you see as the bigger picture, the entire tree in front of you, drawn, you say, okay, this is great. This is something, fits perfectly. And it makes sense when they come together. Now I know I will use the cliche word, now I know the meaning of life, you say. And if this is the case, you would admit that the person who draws the tree knows about the tree. I guess this is what I understood from the paragraph. Yusuf, are you
Yes.
available? Okay.
Jazakallah khair. Exactly. So let me read from the following paragraph then. In just the same way, the discriminating statements of the Quran of miraculous exposition concerning the reality of contingent beings, that is, concerning the reality of the tree of creation, which stretches from the beginning of the world to the farthest limits of the hereafter, and spreads from the earth to the divine throne, and from minute particles to the sun. So Quran's exposition, Quran's statements concerning the reality of contingent beings have preserved the proportion between the members to such a degree, and have given each member and fruit a form so suitable that, at the depictions of the Quran, all exacting scholars have declared at the conclusion of their investigations what wonders God has willed. How great are God's blessings.
Whoops.
They have said, Assalamu alaikum, Nazmul, welcome.
Walaikum salam.
What wonders God has willed, how great are God's blessings. They have said, it's only you who solves and unravels the talisman of the universe and riddle of creation, O all-wise Quran, they would say. Is that clear so far? I think after the explanations and everything, it should be in a good shape. Okay, so I continue. And God's is the highest similitude, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى, and there is no error in the comparison, or you shouldn't be looking for error in comparison. This is what that means. There is no error in the comparison means. Do not seek for errors in the comparison. Let us represent the divine names and attributes and dominical acts and deeds as a tuba tree of light, the sphere of whose grandeur stretches from the pre-eternity to post-eternity, and the limits of whose vastness spread through infinite, endless space and encompass it, and the limits of whose deeds stretch from يحول بين المرء وقلبه فالق الحب والنوى. It is God who splits the seed grain and date stone and comes between man and his heart. Comes between man and his heart. So from here to والسماوات مطويات بيمينه خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام, who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and the heavens rolled up in his right hand. The all-wise Quran has described that luminous reality, the truths of those names and attributes, and acts and deeds together with all their branches and twigs and aims and fruits in a way so harmonious, so fitting for one another, so appropriate for one another, without marrying one another or spoiling the decree of one another, or their being removed from one another, that all the people of illumination and those who have penetrated to the realities And all the wise and the sage who have journeyed in the realm of the inner dimension of things have declared, "Glory be to God," in the face of that discriminating exposition, and have affirmed it, saying, "How right, how conformable with reality, how fine, how worthy." Very briefly, what I see here is, with the examples that he gives in here, because in the first paragraph, he talked about an example of a tree. In the second paragraph, he explained what he mean by that tree. And now in the third paragraph, which is here, he is giving us precise examples from Quran, saying that, look, where does Quran's drawing of that reality? On one hand, it is so minute details to the degree of it is God who splits the seed grain and date stone, like the splitter of the seed to give it life. And also this other verse, which we studied before, يَحُولُ بَيْنَ الْمَرْءِ وَقَلْبِهِ. So God is the one who knows what happens between man and his heart. So he hears that much of minute and even unspoken words that you have in your heart. From that much of detail to who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Now we are talking about so much of a glorious creation, which is emphasizing more in the power and the vastness, while in the first verses, it was more about the details. In another example, and the heavens rolled up in his right hand. So the part that Haidar was asking and Brother Birkan corrected in the translation is, so having these two ends so distant from each other, Quran is talking about both ends by preserving the proportion among them, not overemphasizing one or underemphasizing the other, but explaining everything to the degree that it must be explained, so much so that once you read it, and the author in here is giving reference to the scholars, says they say, how right, how conformable with reality, how fine, how worthy is the speech of Quran. Okay. Any comments about this part? Still, the flow of ideas continue, but if you have a comment, we can listen. Okay, so I continue. Take, for example, the 6 pillars of belief, which are like a single branch of those 2 mighty trees, which look to the entire sphere of contingency and sphere of necessity. Take, for example, the 6 pillars of belief, which are like a single branch of those mighty trees, which look to the entire sphere of contingency and sphere of necessity. It depicts all the branches and boughs of those pillars as far as the furthest fruits and flowers, observing such a harmony and proportion between them, and describes them in a manner so balanced and illustrates them a way so symmetrical that the human mind is powerless to perceive it and stands astonished at its beauty. And the proof of that, a beauty of proportion and perfect relation and complete balance have been preserved between the 5 pillars of Islam, which are like one twig of the branch of belief. Down to the finest details, smallest point of conduct, furthest aims, most profound wisdom, and most insignificant fruits, is the perfect order and balance and beauty of proportion and soundness of the greater Sharia of Islam, which has emerged from the decisive statements, senses, indications, and allusions of the comprehensive Quran. They form an irrefutable and decisive proof and just witness that cannot be doubted. This means that the expositions of the Quran cannot be attributed to men's partial knowledge, and particularly to the knowledge of someone unlettered. They rest rather on a comprehensive knowledge and are the word of one who is able to see all things together and observe in one moment all truths between pre-eternity and post-eternity. In this we believe. So in a sense, this final paragraph was the summary of everything that we have read so far, saying that this proportionateness in Quran shows that it cannot be attributed to man's partial knowledge, and particularly to the knowledge of someone unlettered. They rather rest on a comprehensive knowledge and are the word of one who is able to see all things together and observe in one moment all truths between pre-eternity and post-eternity. Okay, so it was a long read. What do you think now? We started from how we will observe the miraculousness of Quran. We came all the way to here. Brother, please go ahead.
Jazakallah khairan for the beautiful read and being patient with us. So this part, as you said, we started with the miraculousness of Quran and mostly related to its style, exposition, and so on. Although with every part, we've been discussing how it relates to our lives as well. But here, I guess it's the most obvious. Just a second, please. Sorry. So with this one, it is very obvious that it is the miraculousness this time. It's not only about the style, it's about how what is narrated in Quran is miraculous in the sense that it make your entire life, the entire universe, as you know, unfolds around you, make it so lively, so lively, so meaningful, so purposeful. And this is the miracle. And this is so big a miracle that it is really hard to imagine. And the author is, you know, using all these analogies and so on. Somebody's drawing the tree. But when you think about it, that the goal and aim of the Quran is explaining you, guiding you in every aspect of your life, and achieving this. It's such a big miracle. Alhamdulillah. So this is what I understood from today's text.
So maybe it's not going to be a good example, but again, don't look for errors in the example. But being a Lord of the Rings fan myself, or like, I always liked how in depth Tolkien talks about his Middle Earth. But you feel, although it's like an imaginary world, we can take it somewhat of an example of what the author is giving here as the tree. So as if Tolkien is unveiling us a tree which is only seen to him, and he's drawing it over a paper. But once you look at the tree that he draws, still you see that there are disproportionateness over the tree. Of course, this is an example because you cannot really experience elves or orcs or whatever. But in those stories of imaginary, still there are a lot of inconsistencies, disproportionateness, and that's fine, we say, because although how great of an author he was a human being. So when he was dwelling too much on, I don't know, some heroic behavior of Beran at some point, maybe he was putting less emphasis on some minute detail in Bilbo's life, whatever. So these are the things that we do not expect from a human, and to the extent we see, we say, well, like Tolkien, he did so great. Like compare it with, I don't know, Rowling's Harry Potter series. You say, wow, like Tolkien was really did a masterpiece with all its shortcomings. It was great. But when we talk about now the existence, the book of existence, which it is something that now we can also verify. It's not about somebody's imagination only. The tree that is being drawn, I am able to verify its truthfulness because I also experience it. It's not only a story being told me for which I am seeking whether it is consistent within itself. But no, it needs to be consistent with the reality that I am living in. And there are tons of examples of people who attempt doing that. All the philosophers are trying to come up with drawing a picture of this book of existence, trying to define a purpose and meaning to me, to my life. And nowadays they say there's no purpose, no meaning, which seems to be saying that, well, there's no tree behind the veil. Everything is here. When, I mean, in this climate now, when I see Quran and how it is explaining me, what I am, what is my purpose, what is the purpose of the whole existence, and how it perfectly fits, I say, this is beyond what we have seen from humans. So this is beyond human words. It cannot be the speech of men. Okay. Any comments, any questions, please? At this later part, the author, oh, Brother Bikram, please go ahead.
Just one point about the very beginning, where he was saying that, you know, if you want to understand the miraculousness of Quran, you should go back to the time of, what was the word there? Savagery? Ignorance and savagery, I guess, something like that.
Yeah, it's in the screen now. It's imagine yourself in the age of ignorance and desert of savagery.
Okay. So you should realize your darkness and ignorance, that you live in such a desert. If you can do this, the author was saying, then you can realize how these words explaining now, combining with, putting together with what we just read, how all these words explaining, giving a purpose to your life, then you will realize that this is a huge miracle. Because before, your life was purposeless. You've been working, you've been studying, you've been living for no reason. All the problem you had, all the fights you had, all the achievements you gained, they were for nothing. You will die. And then these verses come and say that, do you know what? Everything fits to a perfect picture. All the names, all the things that you've been through, they come together perfectly. Your life has a purpose. Without making such a connection, the author was saying, if you don't make such a connection between your savagery, your ignorance, and the light that the verses of Quran brings, if you do not make the connection between the two, the author was saying, you wouldn't see it. You would just ignore it. Even if, author was saying, even if you glorify Quran just as a part of your culture or part of your generic, let's say, belief, that the Quran is great, Islam is great, this is our religion, how fantastic it is. If you do that, author was saying at the very beginning, you wouldn't see the miracle. It will be just a common knowledge for you. But if you make the connection, if you go to the desert of savagery of your life, if you go to your desert, your ignorance, face it, and then let the verses illuminate your darkness, then you will see the miraculous aspect of Quran, which is the biggest miracle maybe of Quran. Jazakallah khairan.
وإياكم. So it's also then author is somewhat suggesting us to make that journey so that we appreciate what we have, which reminds me of fasting in a sense, because like in regular times, whenever I am thirsty, whenever I am hungry, I just grab food or drink. So I do not truly appreciate, actually I do not have time to appreciate. I simply drink water and my thirst disappears. I do not even give myself a chance to recognize how needy I was and then recognize the value of the water and then be thankful to the provider of water. So fasting is such times where the Creator invites us by command to have enough time for ourselves to remember the importance of all of these so that we can now truly become thankful to the Creator. And how do I do that when it comes to Quran? Shall I become those savage, like dive into a life like this? Or the author says no, but in order to appreciate it, you need to at least temporarily put that mindset to your head to realize what it will look like without the light of the Quran, so that I can truly appreciate its true value, as I do not see the value in water, although my body appreciates it, but my consciousness do not appreciate the value of water when I am not thirsty, when I am not fasting. So do the same with Quran, because Quran is such a bounty, such a blessing, which I need to be appreciative of, because my Creator is speaking to me. So realizing that value is so important. What happens is, if some important person sends you a personal email, not from their company email, but their personal email, like your CEO of your company or something sends an email to you from their personal email address, not the company one. Like, we feel so important, we feel so much recognized. Now my Creator is speaking to me directly, and the things that he tells me is really enlightening my world. It's a totally different level of happiness and sustenance to me. Yeah, Farah, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to relate my own, I guess, struggle and sometimes solution, but struggle with trying to connect with the Quran in the way that it claims to offer for the human being. And I think I often find that if I'm not reading, quote unquote, the universe, in the sense that if I am not finding the exalted or the, we're using the word miraculous, but this like amazing or awe nature of things around me, which is also very common to not be able to do if you're not contemplating about it, or you're not thinking deeply about it, or there are not moments in your life like we are talking about, thirst or needs of our body, or some tragedy or sickness or happiness, outside of those moments, we don't, or at least I don't tend to think about my life or the things around me or the rain or the trees and all of these elements in some sort of magical or inspiring manner. And when that does not happen in my life, then the speech of the Quran, as in the written words of the Quran, seem to me also to lose their impact in my reading of it. So not to say that one is influencing the other, but it seems to be very in tandem, that if I don't contemplate, sit with the few words of the Quran, and take time to think deeply about it, then I don't seem to do that in my lived life. And if I don't do that in my lived life, then it doesn't sort of translate in my reading of the Quran. So I think in this sense, it is a unique book in the sense that in order to really feel sort of emotion and feel moved or feel some sort of transformation, as this book claims to provide to the human being, then it is something that needs to be experienced in all senses of the word. Whereas when we are reading, let's say, magical literature books, we don't necessarily need to imagine any of that, but it rather just sort of something that we can imagine very easily by just reading it, and don't need to do it outside of our life. So I find that aspect of this book unique and something that I think we probably are not. I'm not trained for it in accessing, unless you grow up and become an adult and you really try and think about, like, okay, why should I give this book any particular attention more than I do to other texts? So that's what I wanted to share.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you very much. Yeah, so this is a thing that we do, or we are invited to do, so that we appreciate what it might mean for us more. Otherwise, I'm just going to take it as another speech, or because it was always in front of me, so it became the norm. So I will not be able to appreciate it. So at the very end, here, the author was talking about the same structure to apply for pillars of belief and pillars of Islam. So the Quran is not only describing the creation, but it says Quran is also, if you would like to focus on one branch of Quran, or one way to take Quran is it's focusing on those 6 pillars of belief. And those 6 pillars are so much so that they are in perfect harmony with each other. And throughout his writings, the author is emphasizing this aspect too much, actually. As of saying that since, let's say, God exists, therefore must be hereafter, therefore must be prophets, therefore must be resurrection and the angels and the books. Or he says, God must exist because prophets are real, or resurrection is real, so on and so forth, like as if he is making a direct relationship between every single one of those 6 pillars of belief, and which is also showing that if you deny one of them or have issues with one of them, the rest is going to become irrelevant or inconsistent for you. And the author would respond to you saying that no, they are perfectly in harmony. This is why you cannot leave out one of them. All of them are perfectly relatable to each other. And he even takes it further and says that the pillars of Islam, which are like one twig of the branch of belief, down to the finest detail, smallest point of contact, furthest aims, in there you're going to find most profound wisdom and very small, detailed benefits. And in other parts, the author claims the very tiniest truths of Islam, I can prove you, he says, that it is full of wisdom and purpose. So he has the same attitude as the Quran is depicting us this reality of the pillars of belief and Islam. He says every single one of them is in perfect harmony with the creation. What do you think about that? Any comments about this part? Okay, it seems to be common knowledge already. So people are perfectly comfortable with it. Then we can move forward. So if there is no comments, questions, I'm going to continue from second gleam. Okay, let me see how far this goes. Oh, it's a little bit long. Okay.
One thing that I just wanted to add, I guess, real quick. I mean, part of the reason why I haven't said anything is also because I feel like others have summarized it very nicely, but and this will just be a different way of saying the same thing, but I think this was on the first page of the first gleam when it's talking about the shining lights, right, versus as shining lights. Maybe one page earlier, even how the verse is like shining stars, right? Scatter darkness of unbelief. And in order for me to appreciate shining stars, there needs to be the night sky. In order for me to appreciate the light that Quranic verses might bring, I need to experience darkness, or perhaps more rightly so, recognize the ways in which darkness might encompass aspects of my life. And in order to appreciate perhaps the balance and proportion, I mean, that part of it, I didn't quite get what I was talking about, the 6 pillars of belief and the balance and proportion part, but perhaps in order to appreciate the balance that something might bring into my life, I also need to, again, similarly recognize the ways in which I am imbalanced. And yeah, I mean, I think we may all experience darkness in aspects of our life, but it's a matter of trying to brighten it up with artificial lights or make do with artificial lights that cast temporary light on them. But then, you know, I don't know, run out of electricity and you go back to the darkness. So to initially at least be okay and be okay with experiencing that darkness in terms of saying, this is what I'm going through. And I need a source of light that is not extinguishing. And once I open myself up to that, once I open myself up to receiving that, then I can be a conscious recipient, hopefully, of that comprehensive guidance that the Quranic verses are offering. Yeah, that's all I want to add.
Thank you. Like in our practical life, if we think about it, I think we have enough of those doubts already. If I take my own experience, like I had all those questions actually, all those darknesses, like the sky, stars for me were really lifeless piece of fire. And I remember going through those times, especially when I was studying for exams very heavily. I thought I was a super religious guy at the same time, though. Like I was not feeling the pain apparently on the surface, but I think it was a perfect example for myself, looking at it through superficial and simple veil of familiarity. In such a time, a friend of mine just showed myself my reality that for me, stars are truly lifeless pieces of fire. I just pretended as if they were, either I was never thinking about them, or I was saying that, yeah, Quran says angels and whatever, but I was just escaping from that. So my case was a clear example of looking through a superficial, simple veil of familiarity, thinking that, yeah, I know what those skies are. But I was a super devout student of uh, scientific materialist worldview. And after one of my friends shocked me within 3 hours and all the things that I thought I knew about God in just 3 hours, I started then questioning. When I look at a tree, I see photosynthesis, I see respiration formulas and everything, since these were the things I was studying back then. But no purpose, no message, no meaning, no nothing. So, I mean, even maybe we do not need to imagine ourselves in those days before Quran, but more like uh, if I be a little bit honest with myself and stop looking at it through a superficial and simple veil of familiarity, I will realize that what Quran says and what I truly believe in are quite different. So this is why I was experimenting with MSA students. I was telling them, how does it rain? They were saying that, would you like a scientific answer or a religious answer? So what we mean by religious answer is, I think, this looking at it through a superficial and simple veil of familiarity. Because what we sometimes, or maybe most of the time, truly believe is the scientific explanation, which is the stars in those black skies are like lifeless pieces of fire, and the creation is wretched creatures on the face of the earth. So we don't need to go too far. We don't need to, oh, let me experience this so that I can appreciate Quran more. No, no, this is already our reality for a good portion of the time, I would say. I don't know, the people that attend this discussion for some time might be an exception for that, but this is closely very much our reality, unfortunately. Nazmul, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I mean, I had, I mean, not as extreme of an experience, but I believe this was 2 Ramadans ago, where I read the Quran. I was reading the Quran, trying to get through it, and at the time, like, I didn't find any type of meaning or use in like exercise, right? Like just simple thing like taking a walk outside. You know, it's just looking at some trees. Like, who cares, right? Or like, why do that rather than sit home and play video games? Like, obviously, in terms of materialistic fun, one is objectively more fun, right? It's more exciting. um and so like that's how I thought for a very long time. um and but when I read the Quran that Ramadan, I got to, I believe, surah, I think it was surah Nahl, right? And just the quantity of description of the universe in the Quran is just, I mean, it becomes overwhelming, right? It's like every other page and every other verse is just asking you, contemplate this, contemplate that. Don't you see we send the rain? Don't you see we make the bee in this way? Don't you see we make the camel this way? I'm just like, and if you're sort of a materialistic person, I guess you would want to, I guess, quickly read past those things, right? At least I used to do that. Like, I would just, okay, all right, this is nature stuff. Let me get to, oh, where's this verse about legal, you know, this or that, or verse about jihad or something like this, right? So before that Ramadan, I would just sort of skip those verses. But after, you know, during that Ramadan, when I just looked at the quantity of those verses and actually read them and reflected on them, it actually translated into my life, where now I can actually enjoy taking a walk, right? And there is actually something to be found in taking a walk, in looking at a tree, in feeling the sun in your face, and like experiencing outside life. And like that's something that's a very, I think, a Quranic encouragement, right? For us to experience the outward life and not simply to be stuck in within our own nafs and sort of not look at the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think that's a very important lesson. And for a conclusion, that like experiencing that outward life and finding meaning in sort of just being able to look at a tree or being amazed by looking at the stars, as you said, from this perspective, it actually does become more fulfilling than, I don't know, like eating junk food or playing video games or something like this, right? Because it's like when you eat something that tastes good and is healthy and it fulfills you versus when you eat something that is like junk food, but you experience pleasure in the moment, but you actually feel horrible afterwards.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Actually, Nursi's writings, in his writings, since he keeps giving examples or talking about birds and seeds and flowers, sometimes there's this criticism saying that, well, why are you talking about birds and flowers? Just these are, this is not religion. Like for religion, you don't talk about this stuff. One group of people would come up with such arguments. Another type I heard was saying that, well, this is too much philosophical. But when I look at Quran is coming up with such things and giving those details, as Nazmul said, talking about like seas or skies or the clouds or I don't know, fruits, bees. Actually, once I was counting through the names of the chapters of Quran, it was like I don't know, a lot of animal names, a lot of plant names and whatever. So it's interesting how the creator is inviting me to think about these stuff, which I will simply just gloss over, don't pay attention with a super superficial gaze simply. Nazmul makes a comment saying, what's interesting is that Quran will reply to objections and philosophical arguments by describing nature or something on creation. Yep, Jazakallah khair. So, looking for if there is any comments about this later part, possibly on the Islam and Iman, pillars of belief, pillars of Islam, and the harmony between them. If you don't have any comments about that, we can end the discussion early today because we have 11 minutes left. But I don't think we should start the next part because it's going to be a long read. Second gleam. Okay. فالق الحب والنبات فالق الحب والنبات يحول بين المرء وقلبه. Okay. Okay, since there's no comments, I think we can conclude here. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم.